Sahil to the bottom. Okay. Okay, we'll go live. Okay, I think we're live.
Yeah, we're good.
Let me. Oh, you check? Are we good?
Yep, we're live.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our brand new episode of Courtcast. I am your host, Tim.
And I'm Mikey.
And this is Sahil. Welcome everybody to a brand new exciting episode of Queercast. Before we get started, if you haven't already, do join our Discord channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, where we do this every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, do ask us questions during the episode so we can get to them. Without further ado, let's get to it. So I guess we've been continuing down the theme of talking about time, like the flow of time. Can time go backwards? And if you haven't checked out a previous episode on that, do check it out. Do dive very deep into that. And now we want to ask the question like the quote unquote end of time. Like, does it exist? What's going on with that? I guess Mikey, I'm gonna throw the ball over to you and ask you like what the fascination, like the philosophical implications of the end of time, like just kind of lay the groundwork.
I want to throw the ball back to you. I want to what do you think? I want to know what you think about this. So like how they like there's a question like if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there
Yeah,
to hear it, does it really make a sound, right? And
I
I
would
think okay, no, for that, like I think I can take that one. It depends on what you mean by sound, right? So if you're a physicist, you mean like compression waves in the air. And then
mm,
obviously the answer is yes, because when a tree falls, it makes compression waves in the air. But what do you think of this? If there's a universe and there's no meaningful way to tell the difference between one time and a later time,
yeah.
let's say because everything's like random, so it's just like, there's no like progression of anything. It's just like, and so there's literally like every time looks the same as every other time. Can you
Uh-huh.
say that time is passing?
I don't think so actually.
Uh,
Like if I really can't like measure it, does it exist? I don't know if it does. I
that's
mean,
a really
could.
tough one, right? No, because like literally, if you were there to measure it, then you would be breaking this um, assumption that you can't tell one time from
Mhm.
another because at some point, if you're measuring it, you started to measure it and you finish measuring it, right? So there's like obviously 2 points in time
Yeah.
that are different from each other. So this is really the philosophical question that we should be asking instead of like the. I feel like this is the highest level of the tree falling in the forest question.
Well,
I'm
I would say there's
I was
yeah.
oh go Tim.
I would say that's a different aspect, right? So, Mikey, what you're referring to is the practical aspect, but layer on top of that, there's also a theoretical aspect that space and time, as Einstein put it,
Yeah,
is one and the
I just
same
wanted to
thing.
get his opinion though before we get into that. Yeah, just
So yeah,
because no, because it's very like I agree. There's like a theoretical aspect too, but it's also the kind of question that like
yeah.
anyone can think about.
Hmm.
So it's yeah. So yeah, continue. Tim,
No, I'm saying,
I cut you off. Yeah.
what are your thoughts, Sahil?
No, no,
Oh, oh wow, I'm flipping the script.
no.
All right then. I will I would be in the
He
camp of
said
saying
no.
no. I would say
Yeah.
no. I would say unless there's like a entity in which can construct a language using the construct of time, I don't know if it's actually a thing that really exists or whether it actually even makes sense to a certain degree.
Yeah,
Like you need a language in order to describe it.
I
And
would
so if
say,
you can't
yeah,
measure it, then yeah, I don't know. I'm less convinced.
I would say that's probably a little too strict from a physicist point of view. I think as
Mhm,
long as there is some level of change, some level of dynamics that happens, I would say that
mhm,
then there is some sort of dynamical definition of time. And then, of course, that's to contrast it with a theoretical definition of time, where there's just, hey, we have some kind of space time, and this time thing exists. So I think to answer this question, it's kind of like there are two questions now. You know, there is some sense in which the theoretical definition of time could cease to exist. Then time will end to some extent. And then there's also the practical aspect where the time that Mikey's mentioning, hey, is there some appreciable change, that we can call time exists, and is that ending? So I guess now this question has got two pieces, two kinds of time.
Wait, two kinds of time being one that has an end and one that has like a flow to it.
Well, I would say two kinds of ways that time could end, right? Like when people ask, hey, can time end? They could mean two different things, although they're both somewhat related to some extent.
Are they?
Well,
Oh,
perhaps
wait for that.
I don't know. Like, which one do we talk about first? Maybe the theoretical one first, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
clean.
that's like the kids one.
Yeah, I would say for that to happen, then there has to be some kind of catastrophic end to space-time. Basically, like there was a space-time, and bam, there's no more space-time, right? So that would determine the kind of the actual end of the time. I guess, like, for example, if you fall into a black hole, we know that there's a sense in which after some fixed amount of time that you experience, you hit the singularity. And if we believe that singularity is kind of something catastrophic happens to you, so let's say Sahil, you fall into a black hole, well then for you time has ended. I'm sorry. Like you got scrambled by the black hole, spit back out. Do whatever way, but to you, time has ended. So in a similar vein, our universe, there's a plausibility that it could undergo that kind of transformation, right? Like it's akin to kind of falling into a black hole. But, in a way, our universe could kind of collapse onto itself, and then it hit a singularity, kind of like a reverse, like a, what do you call it? Like a Big Bang reversal. And that's one definitive way that time will just end. It's just like, whoops, there's no more. So I think that's one way that time could end, but doesn't seem like it's happening though.
Wait, what about like if you fall through the event horizon of a black hole, by the time people, quote unquote, I'm using quotes, see you fall into a black hole, time will have ended from an external frame of reference outside.
Sure. That's also, to them, time also has ended to some extent, but I guess
I think the key point on what Tim is talking about is like, so we like to think about space and time as like a fabric, right? So like space, you can think of as a fabric and you can move around it, but also time, right? You can like move around and go somewhere, forward in time as we imagine flowing through this fabric. And one way in which you can imagine time ending is if this fabric is just destroyed. Like either you stretch it so much that it rips apart, or you just crush it so much that it disappears. And that's one way that time can end. And just the other way that time can end is, maybe this fabric doesn't disappear or get destroyed, but just the notion of time becomes essentially meaningless.
Yeah, I think people talk about it's almost like a cigar shape. It's like, you look at the beginning of the cigar, that's like the beginning of the Big Bang. And you look at the end of the cigar, that's the end of Big Bang, let's say a big crush, But then to talk about the universe beyond the cigar, it doesn't make sense anymore. It's just the end of the universe, right? So if you're in the universe, you'll be like, well, there's no more. From an external perspective, maybe there's something beyond. But from your perspective, you live in the universe. You can't escape it. You'll be like, well, yeah, that's the end of time. So I think that's the most unambiguous way that time could end. And that's a theoretical possibility, although it seems unlikely right now, I think.
Oh yeah, just to go back to what Tim was talking about, like for the black hole, right? So we're talking about what like ways in which space-time can be destroyed, and a black hole is kind of like, imagine you poke the fabric, and Tim's saying basically you can fall into that hole that was poked in the fabric, and that can be the way you experience time ending.
Makes sense. So you're either talking about like I guess like something like a great kind of collapse or a great sort of stretching, such that just the fabric of space-time just changes completely into something unrecognizable.
Those are the two canonical options. Those are the two like things that it's those are the two broad things that can happen.
I see, I see. And so is this condition of like for for the case of things like ripping apart, the condition of like smoothness and connectivity within this fabric is essential to maintain like space, essentially maintain the notion of time.
Uh,
I would say,
yes,
yeah,
yeah. The continuity of the continuity of space is crucial for the notion of time. I would say, right? Yeah,
yeah,
and it's
I
true that the
see.
big rip would indicate kind of an end to this continuity.
yeah. I mean,
Can
mhm.
oh go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, to follow that point, like we could be like one cigar, or I don't know, one link in the sausage, right? I mean, there could be multiple
Mhm.
linkages, but then we probably wouldn't say that, time continues on because like it's a different universe. So it's plausible, although unlikely. It's not supported by
Mm.
any evidence experimentally that the universe could be some kind of like I don't know what do you call it, a infinite link of sausages, kind of just in and out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's entirely possible that time can end in some places, but it can continue existing in other places. Like the example we just talked about with the black hole, where like if we believe
Mm.
general relativity,
Mm.
then literally there's a certain point in space where time ends, but all the other points
Mm.
in space, time keeps flowing.
Mm. That makes sense. That makes sense. Mikey, you mentioned the word big rip. Just wanted to clarify for the
Did
audience,
I?
like what that's referring. Yeah, you said the word big rip. Can you define what
Ah,
that is? Or do you
yeah,
not
I
want to
think
get into it?
no. It'll require a little bit of like a leap of faith, I guess.
Okay.
um, but like, so if you imagine that the universe is getting bigger, right?
Hmm.
Let's say you imagine that space is stretching, so like every foot becomes 2 feet. Like,
Hmm.
um, then one of the consequences of that is that points that are farther away from you are
Hmm.
moving away faster, um,
Yep.
right? Because the amount of space is doubling. So if there's more space between me and with a farther away object, that amount of space doubles in the same amount of time. So things that are moving away um, move faster if they're farther away from you under this scenario
Hmm.
where you imagine space is stretching. So that's the thing that, like, if you can accept that, um, one of the consequences of that, that means that there's a point in space, like around us, where things are moving away faster than the speed of light. Um, and those are places that we can never reach because we can't send signals faster than the speed of light.
Hmm.
Um, and if the universe's expansion accelerates,
Hmm.
then the distance between points that are moving away at the speed of light gets smaller. And eventually, the universe is accelerating in its expansion so fast that points that are infinitely close together are now moving away at faster than the speed of light. And at that point, you basically can't use space to communicate anything because everything's moving away from everything faster than the speed of light. So it literally rips it into points.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Uh
It literally like it rips space into a grid of like uniformly separated points. It's
to
like a
throw in a
perfect
pun,
atomization.
to throw in a terrible pun, that's like a rip of faith. I don't
Rip
know.
of
That
faith.
was I don't know, leap of faith. Okay, that was really dumb. I'm
Wait, what's
Want
the
to see
faith
if that
part?
could work. I don't know. You said leap of faith. This requires a leap of faith to accept.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just it was a really bad joke. Let's move on.
Yeah,
Okay.
but even in this scenario is a little different than the big crunch, right? Like the sausage linkage scenario, like this. And in fact, this is what we are observing, allegedly from the data that we're seeing. Really far away galaxies are doing that to some extent. So this
To some
seems,
extent.
well, it is true. Let's just say
They're
it's true.
exactly doing
It's a
that.
very concrete evidence. Um, so this is probably the quite likely scenario for our universe, but theoretically the notion of time still exists, right? But this notion of time becomes kind of meaningless because when you're at the big rip scenario, if you imagine you're an particle, there will just be nothing left for you, right? It's just you don't see
Mhm.
anything. There's no notion in which you can talk to people like, hey, this is happening, that's happening. In fact, nothing will be happening. So so time, while time theoretically exists, meaningful time kind of ceases to
No,
exist.
I would say that time theoretically doesn't exist in the big rip scenario.
Well, I mean, in a very naive way, you can write down Einstein's equation, and space and time have
No,
these
but the
directions.
physical size of the light cone shrinks to like 0 basically. So yeah, you literally it's like it's discontinuous, I think, isn't it?
No, there's still. I mean, the beam of light will still has a future. I mean, you still
No, a beam of light can't escape any any kind of radius. It's a beam of light is trapped in physically in a physical point
yeah, but
at size 0.
it still kind of has a future, right? It's just a really terrible, almost singular future. But
It's a destruction of the fabric. When we think of general relativity as space, it's like a smooth fabric, right? It's a destruction of the smoothness of that space. I would say. You had this smooth thing that you call time because you can flow through it, and now all of a sudden it's not smooth anymore. It's just completely, it's like atomized, literally, like it's completely dusted.
yeah, so I guess, I mean, at some point quantum physics will have to be important, but we'll get into that. So our universe,
Yeah, this is just assuming that you take classical
Yeah.
general relativity
Yeah.
perfectly seriously.
so our universe has some aspect of that, but there's also another aspect. So our universe is not so eager to do the big rip yet, right? It's got stuff in it, right? The atoms are not going to be ripping apart anytime soon. And I think there's a third aspect that people have been talking about, is probably the most popular, well known, is sort of the ultimate heat death of the universe, which actually is not as ultimate as you think. I think it's a little bit oversold. Yeah.
I would say the
Wait,
heat death is the thing that makes in which time becomes meaningless, but still kind of exists.
wait. So Tim, can we double click on what you just said about like it being oversold? That was not my impression of the end of the universe was heat death.
Yeah, I
Is that
think
not correct or?
yeah, to some extent it's correct, but
We were
it's
just discussing this right before this.
yeah, but
we were like, is it?
I mean, I think personally, I don't like it so much because it's not telling you very much. It kind of misses the nuances. So the idea is that, all the kind of the useful energy of the universe will be used up. All the star will stop shining, and eventually collapse into black holes. Black holes will evaporate. They'll decay into radiations and all that. And then at this point, you have what we call maximum entropy, and we described in previous episode. Entropy is just possibilities, and it turns out that if you spread out all the possibility in the universe into just radiation, particles of light spread out all over the universe, that's where it's at, right? And then this kind of give people visions of kind of like a heat bath, right? Kind of like a bath of just particles of light, and then there's no utility to be derived. There's nothing you can do with it, because these are all kind of like heat exhaust of the universe. That's useless. But I think that picture is a little bit misleading, because that's not going to happen. It's not literally a heat bath, because we already have some examples of that. It's the cosmic microwave background. It's the afterglow of the Big Bang. It's kind of like that, and but not quite. It's not quite a bath of just heat. It's actually a little more subtle, I would say.
What's subtle about it? I mean, we're approximate. So I think the simplest analogy to describe what Tim is talking about is like, if you have hot water, you can do work with it, but that water reaches room temperature, then it's not going to be really useful for anything. And the heat death is like the hypothesis that our universe is, as it expands, everything is slowly going to exchange energy with everything else and come to some kind of equilibrium state where now everything is uniform law, like room temperature. And I think we came to the conclusion actually before this podcast started, but me and Tim were talking in private, that it's true that the universe isn't really going to stay like that. It's going to get really close to room temperature, and then another Google years later, it's gonna big rip.
Yeah, but well, not quite way below the room temperature, right? Like this is a really
Mm.
cold heat death. Like there's nothing heat about it.
No, I don't mean literally room
Yeah,
temperature. Like
yeah,
room temperature being absolute zero. Like the
yeah,
room
yeah,
temperature of the universe is absolute zero.
yeah, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
it's gonna be a really
For
cold.
humans to do useful work, we need something that's not room temperature.
So I guess can we take a step back and kind of explain this, like break this down a bit more? Like, can you explain like the sequence of events a little bit more in terms of like, black holes, everything turns into black holes. Black holes are all that's left is black holes, they radiate away, and then you just have this like dilute, at least from what I've heard, the way it's explained, a dilute gas of photons. These black holes radiate photons via Hawking radiation, and then as the universe still expands, those photons get stretched and stretched until they have like infinite wavelength from, but not literally, but you
Yeah,
know, um, at least
I
yeah,
mean, yeah.
mathematically. And
I
so
think
from that
Tim can talk
point,
about
what
the
do you
yeah.
yeah.
Tim can talk about that physical history of what happens, but just before that, I wanted to just note that like it's not anything that's complicated that's happening. Like even though the process might sound complicated, there's
Mhm,
actually a really good Isaac Asimov short story about this called The Last Question,
mhm,
um, which is Isaac Asimov's favorite thing that he ever wrote. And it's basically asking like it's the idea that like eventually all the fuel will be spent and there'll be no more fuel left. Like the stars will burn out, and then anything that you could use to make fuel or burn will be already ash, not literally ash, but metaphorical ash.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and yeah, they're like you were alluding to like this. We know how that's going to happen, and there's this big process,
yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, and I would say the details aren't so important because even if our universe was somewhat different, let's say the stars didn't shine the way it's supposed to, let's say we didn't have the kind of nuclear reactions that we have, it's still gonna just exhaust all these options, like what Mikey was saying, right? Like whatever interesting that it can do, it will do. I mean, some of these processes could take really long, like proton decay will take a fantastically long time. Hawking radiation, black hole decay will take super duper long. But those will happen because we literally have eternity to wait for them. And when all that's said and done, there's still an eternity of time. I mean, time in the theoretical sense that things continuously happen, and that's kind of the ultimate thermal heat, quote unquote, heat death. It's just a universe that's on this expanding trajectory, but with nothing else interesting that goes on. It just exhausts all options of change happening. So that's really the crux, I think, to take away.
Okay. So that's the heat death, correct?
Yeah,
What you
yeah.
just described.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
how
It's a
is
universe of pure randomness.
so then how is this not as nuanced as you were saying?
Ah, because that's actually missing perhaps quantum physics, right? Because
Okay.
remember that in quantum physics, there's kind of this lore that thing like things that are possible could happen. Your different parts of the universe could tunnel in different things. I guess quantum physics is kind of a way of introducing interesting thing when you have eternity to do so, basically, right?
Mhm,
And it turns out that there are these models called eternal inflation. Um, these are theoretical models, but it's telling you that sure, the universe can go through this infinite period of infinitely expanding universe,
mhm,
but your structure of the universe could also be quite complicated. There could be vacua that are unexplored, and what when that happens, when you wait for a really really long time, different little pockets of universes could undergo drastic phase transitions, and and when that
huh,
That's a lot of
happens,
words.
when that happens,
That's a phase transition.
almost like bubbles popping out of a pot of water, new stuff could happen, new universes could form, and then this gives you a much more interesting picture, right? Like the end of time may not actually be so empty after all. There could be new beginnings
hmm.
arising from it. So
So
Yeah,
you're
it's funny
saying
when
like
when you think about regular physics, infinity is really depressing. But when
mhm,
you think about quantum physics, infinity starts to be a source of life and hope. So it's interesting.
So you're saying if you wait a quote unquote infinite amount of time, then a universe will just pop out, like infinite number
Anything
of
that can happen
universes.
will happen. Anything that can happen will happen in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics says that anything that can happen has to happen.
Well, within some limit, but then many things.
If there's infinite, no, if there's infinite amount of time, then it has to happen.
I see. So then I guess okay, so then a new universe could pop up and time could still keep continuing in that universe that just popped up.
Yeah, and also let me say this, right? When people assume that there's an ultimate heat death, we're kind of assuming that there's an ultimate bare minimum, like a baseline, some kind of a potential energy that the universe will reach, right? There's some kind of a floor that stops whatever interesting happening from happening. But what if there is no floor? What if this is an infinite runaway? Because that's not totally impossible. Then when that's true, then there's almost infinite energy to borrow. It's almost like I guess the debt ceiling of the U.S. But politics aside, if we do have a source of potential energy that's just an infinite runaway, yeah, then this eternal inflating model could just like we could keep borrowing energy from the vacuum in some sense and keep making stuff and have it almost like a fractal structure of things coming out and out and out and out and out. So this is a very interesting possibility and actually not that crazy actually, I think.
So you're saying the party never ends, basically. There's a chance the party could never end.
There's a chance. No, I mean, I think even if that's true, likely we'll find that this vacuum is like actually some like it's some non-renewable energy source. Or something.
Yeah, we can't use it. Yeah, we're not going to be able to use it. But the universe is a little more resourceful than we are because it's got infinite time.
That is something we don't have. I agree with that. Okay, so I guess we're almost at time, and wanted to like give you guys a chance to summarize and answer, come back to our original question. When does time end? Does it end? Like how, like what are your guys' thoughts after looking at these different perspectives? I'm gonna start with you, Mikey. Just to pick on
yeah,
you.
more interesting than I thought. I don't know. Right, because I think to ask that question, you have to start talking about things related to infinity, and the conversation automatically becomes unreliable at that point. So, yeah. I don't know. I've been bad with these closing thoughts lately. I don't know. I got nothing.
All right, Tim, we'll toss it off to you.
Yeah, I would say, at least from my discussion, I think if I were to place bets, I don't think time will end in the naive way. It's not just going to be abruptly end like right now, like or like our universe falling into a black hole kind of, and just the universe ends. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think our concept of time, because we live in our universe, so we don't get to have a bird's eye view. So I believe our way of time will probably terminate because discontinuities in the universe actually isn't as insane as you think, right? But then it kind of gives you this fascinating perspective that, look, we might already be in one of these fluctuations or whatever, or one of these, like maybe there's already like a multiverse of eternally popping in and out of existence universe, and we're just one of them. And if you zoom out and take that perspective, it humbles you even more, right? Like we're just this tiny little sliver of time, where we perceive some kind of beginning and end, and it's really tiny if you zoom out. And there's this hypothetical bird's eye perspective that, like, look, even this time that we perceive, it's just so minuscule, and that could be a grand, almost a fractal-like structure of all these like branches. And I think that's where I'll place my bet on. Like, yeah, our time probably will end, but there's infinite, possibilities of time in many different places. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great closing thought. So
Wait, can I go again? I would just say, read the last question. It's like literally exactly what we're talking about. Like everything, uh, we reach the heat death and everything, and then I won't just spoil it. And then quantum fluctuation happens, and then let there be light.
Is it like Groundhog Day happens all over again?
No, it's such a good. I mean, this, yeah. I can't believe in 1954 he knew that the universe was, man.
Who
We should give a
It
little
takes 30
credit.
minutes to read. Just Google it and read it.
Oh, Isaac Asimov?
Yeah, the last question. It's like a 30-minute read. It's just it's the best story ever.
Gotcha. Actually,
Exactly,
on that note,
exactly what we're talking about.
I actually have one really quick question for you guys. Really crazy question. That I heard someone ask me once. I'm really curious to get your guys' thoughts. Like, what if like when you die, like time slows down? So you never actually really reach the end of time. Things just keep slowing down, but everybody else has already like moved past.
I
Like
would have
as your
liked to
brain
think
gets
that, but
slower, your brain gets slower at processing. So things just get slower.
Yeah.
yeah, it's unlikely because there would be a floor as to how much things could slow down. Like you couldn't stretch time out infinitely because you don't have access to infinitesimally fine-grained
Yeah, I guess
information. Oh, yeah.
I guess our discussion on this time, and yeah, it's not us human centric. Like obviously we all going to die, and then
Yeah.
so but
There's no neural processes because to stretch time out to infinity, you'd have to start getting relativistic, and there's just none of the neural processes we know about are relativistic.
yeah, it is kind of fascinating to think that humans, we have such limited span with such limited capabilities, can even conceive of something, as impressive as the universe, and kind of contemplate this notion of time that's well beyond our lifespan. I mean, that's kind of fascinating. I mean, we might get
Well, infinities. I would
Yeah.
argue that we don't, right? Like infinity is such a foreign object to us. Like we can't understand it, and I would really don't think our bodies emulate it in any way.
yeah, but still
We're so
logically,
far from infinity.
I think we still get some things right. I would
Yeah.
hope to believe so. I think we are getting some of that pictures right. Probably not 100%, but I think some of this.
I think everything about humanity is temporary and ephemeral, and like Brad Pitt said in the movie Troy, that's what makes life beautiful. Right. None of this like the fantasy about like wanting to live forever out of a fear of death, right? Like we should just own up and face the music bravely.
Fair. Yeah. Well, on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, see you all next week. Bye.